Cops of Reddit, what was your biggest "I truly am sorry I have to arrest you" moment and why? I'm no longer a cop, but my first ever DUI arrest was a guy I went to a very small college with and we graduated together. I knew his family, his dog's name, we were friends. He was weaving all over both lanes and running onto the shoulder on both sides of the road. He cried and begged me to just let him go and he'd walk home and that he was sorry. He had to go to jail. I'm not a cop, but there I started off all your comments for you. I draw the blood for DWI arrests, so not a cop, but I was sitting in the assistant district attorney's office when an officer calls in and he stated that he felt horrible arresting this lady for drunk driving, even though she was plastered, because she was at her boyfriend's house and they all were drinking and the boyfriend's friend started trying to abuse her and her boyfriend did nothing about it. So she hit the friend in the head and got in her car and fled from danger. Another driver called her into 911 for swerving. The lady drove 3 miles and made it to a gas station where she was found trying to call her friends on her phone for help. He felt bad that he had to bring her in, but the ADA didn't accept any charges on her and the officer took her to her friend's house. 2 other officers went back to the boyfriend's house and they got arrested with existing warrants and a sexual assault. Seeing that woman sitting in the jail for the few minutes she was there was heartbreaking. She was covered in scratches and her clothes were torn. I'm so glad they didn't charge her for fleeing being raped. I'm not a cop, but I played one in a play in grade school. I was supposed to arrest someone after they confessed, but poor kid forgot his line. But I didn't. So it came off as I made up a burglary charge on the spot and hauled him off. Never felt more corrupt in my life. It haunts me to this day. Edit. Wow. My first gold. Thank you kind folks for all the positivity towards this comment, and I'm glad my little childhood story could bring a bit of sunshine to such a dreary thread. As a probation agent, I was supervising Tim, early 20s, on probation for possession of narcotics. Tim lived in assisted living apartments due to severe mental health. Great person who just needed help learning more about his mental health. I received a report that Tim started to like one of the staff members, Stacy. She worked third shift at their main house and often handed out medication. I talked to Tim about healthy boundaries between client and staff. Well, fast forward a couple days. Tim checked himself in the hospital because he tried to make a few advances with Stacy but it was denied. Stacy described it as scary as she was working in the main house and he followed her in a room and shut the door. Another staff member intervened. She then proceeds to make a report about other behaviors, like he stares at her and tries to be around her. He was arrested and had a short-term jail hold, 4 days, and we placed a no contact. Fast forward a few weeks. I received another report from Stacy stating Tim continues to linger around the main building when she's there at night. The night before, she was on med duty and he went to pick up his medication. She asked him to leave multiple times but he never did. He continued to try to make advances towards her. Finally, a staff member walked in and told him to leave, which he then left. She feels extremely unsafe. I issue a warrant and go to his apartment. I am waiting for police to arrive and I ask him about that contact. He kept repeated. I shouldn't have listened to her, however. He wouldn't go in much depth. Police arrive and he goes to jail. I staff with my supervisor if we should revoke his probation as Tim is engaging in stalking behavior. I was finishing up my investigation and Tim adamantly denied Stacy ever telling him to leave that night. Finally, he breaks down and said they've been having a relationship for the past few months. Sure, it checked his Facebook account, and it is apparent they were dating. She assured him no one will find out. Ranging times to meet, extremely flirty and sexual messages were sent between them. The itch Stacy told me he was stalking her so she wouldn't lose her job. She reported the gestures as unwanted because other staff members caught them together. I was pissed that he went to jail, let alone we almost proceeded with revocation. I felt awful and apologized for the time he spent in jail. This was reported to the supervisor, but the ducking itch didn't lose her job. Anyone else would have their social work listened, revoked or face criminal charges. She just kept on working there. The county moved him to a different program. TLDR. Client was accused of stalking a staff member of his assisted living program. Turns out staff and client were in a relationship and staff made a false report so she wouldn't get fired. I once got a call for domestic violence. Another officer and I park our cars halfway up the block for safety reasons and start walking up to the house when we're approached by a man. He tells us that we're there to arrest him, but he refuses to give a statement. He just says he's sorry. We put him in handcuffs pending the investigation, and I go inside. Short end is that dad was drunk, didn't like the way the son number 1 was talking to him, and started beating him. Mom tried to step in and got pushed down. Son number 2 tries to help, but dad attacks him and chases him out of the house. Mom and son lock themselves in the bathroom and daughter, who was frightened, runs to a neighbor's house. Mom and 2 sons agree on what happened, so it's an easy arrest. But inside the house there was a door with a bunch of locks on it that piqued my curiosity. It was obviously used to lock someone inside. Mom and sons wouldn't tell me what it was for, so I asked dad. He said that the door was for daughter's room. His sons would abuse her at night, so they locked her in to protect her. He said son 1 had been arrested for it, but he wasn't given any jail time and a judge said it was okay as long as they locked the daughter in her room at night. He told me that when he drank he would get angry at his sons, but felt guilty that he did. I didn't think he was lying, but no judge would let a little girl stay in the same house as a rapist. I did some digging and found out the daughter reported being raped to a teacher. After son number 1's arrest, prosecutors and CPS dealt only with the mom, who was entirely uncooperative, and the case was eventually dropped due to lack of evidence. When I asked dad about it, he said that he had a hard time dealing with it at the time and left everything up to his wife. CPS ended up doing an emergency removal on the daughter and another small child. I still had to arrest dad for attacking his family, but I felt bad for it. I have no idea what happened to any of them after that. Not a cop. Also not me. This happened to some friends. My friend Jay is allergic to a lot of things, and accidentally ate something she was allergic to. Her parents called an ambulance, but it's a small town and it was already attending an accident, so they rushed her up to the hospital themselves. Her dad was driving and was speeding and somehow managed to get pulled over by the one cop that wasn't attending the accident. Thankfully the officer realized pretty quickly what was going on. Apparently he was surprised my friend's dad pulled over at all given the circumstances. He couldn't allow her parents to speed the rest of the way, so he put Jay and her mum in his car and rushed her up to the hospital himself. Stayed there until he was sure she was okay. My friend's dad still got a ticket, but the cop also gave him some advice on how to dispute it given it was an emergency. I believe in the end he got off. There was a couple that lived in my district that I knew from outside of work. I happened to know the man had cheated on his wife and was all around a smarmy bastard. The wife was a respected member of the community with a prominent job. The couple also had a young son and were members of the local church. One day, a domestic disturbance gets called out at their residence. Dude was being an ass and got into an argument with her. She gets frustrated enough that she punches him in the face and he calls 911. He says he doesn't want to press charges, just wants us to separate everyone and keep the peace. Wife does what every good Christian is raised to do and tells the truth. Our state has a mandatory arrest law if probable cause is found for any domestic violence crime. Unfortunately, that meant we had to take this sweet, otherwise law-abiding lady to jail. At least the bad guys have the good sense to lie to us. Edit. Jeez. People, I realize that this was a good lawful arrest, and that the wife in this case committed a crime. Also, mandatory arrests for DV crimes are a good thing. This situation was unique in that I knew the couple socially before, and knew the emotional abuse he was doling out. The point of the story is that it was difficult on an emotional level to have to arrest someone I knew with that kind of backstory. Not a cop but a paramedic. Had a patient that was driving on a freeway at 100 km/h when she started having a seizure. A man also driving on the freeway noticed her slumped at the wheel, so he sped up, pulled in front of her, then used his car to slow hers down. I rock up, assess and go to transport the lady to hospital. Cops rock up as they do and find the man had warrants out for his arrest. Slightly awkward, but he had to leave his car on the freeway and go off to the cells. Obligatory not a cop but friends and I were in a popular haunted cemetery in the area at night to get creeped out or whatever. came out of the woods and a forest preserve cop scared the shit out of us by standing near the entrance in the dark, then turning on a flashlight as we approached. He brought us to his car to give us all FP curfew violation tickets and a lecture about people getting mugged in there at night. He gets to one of my friends and as he puts in his license info, an alarm bell goes off. He quickly grabs my friend and puts him against the car and cuffs him. Turns out he had a warrant for missing court for a reckless driving ticket. FP cop was pissed our friend didn't tell him he had a warrant because A, the computer doesn't say what the warrant is for, or didn't at the time, so all they know at first is that they have to quickly arrest someone who may or may not be dangerous, and B, if he knew there was a warrant he wouldn't have run the license. They were just trying to keep kids out of the forest preserve at night, not arrest people for traffic court violations. It was Christmas Eve at a super fancy hotel downtown in my city. Lady drove her vehicle into a parking barrier and hotel security called it in. Got out there and she had her daughter in the car with her. Mom had recently bought her a Christmas puppy, a tiny little corgi. So anyways, I called for one of our DWI units to do the test because it's a felony for the child passenger. Mom fails and we have to handcuff her. She tried to run and my partner takes her to the ground as he falls, slipping all in front of daughter and Christmas puppy. Mom goes to jail and I had to stay with the little girl until her aunt arrived. Learned dad walked out on them earlier in month and mom was having a tough time dealing with it. Mom needed to go to jail. She was drunk but I felt for her and her daughter. Friend of mine who is a cop woke me at 3 in the morning to tell me this story. I completely understand why. I would be bawling my eyes out at making an arrest he did. He was called in to deal with a domestic dispute and arrested the woman because she beat the ever loving it out of the man. He told me he probably had a broken nose and wouldn't be shocked if he had vision problems, one of his eyes, for the rest of his life. My friend brought the woman in and she had some fresh marks as well. A couple cuts and a solid bruise on her arm. She also had a couple wounds that had clearly been there for a couple days and a couple that looked like they had just healed. My friend thinks that the man was abusing her for the longest time and she just snapped and defended herself. Thing is, my friend's mother was also abused by his father, so arresting who seemed to be the overall victim broke his heart. My godmother is a single mom of 4. Now she has 5. IDK how TF it happened. But someone called immigration on her. ICE shows up to arrested her. All of her kids have different dads. And who TF knew where any of them were. So CPS is called and you have mom being led away by ICE and the 4 kids being dragged away by CPS. The youngest was 6. 4 attorneys go golfing. While golfing, one accuses the other of being a cheat. Argument escalates until the accuser loses it and hits the dude with a gold club over the back. Hard enough to leave a mark and snap the head off the golf club. Arrest the dude and he is just sobbing in the patrol unit about how he will lose his license and he is so far in debt with his school loans. The dude needed to be arrested but you still had to feel empathy with him knowing he just drunkenly flushed his degree down the toilet. Not a cop, but a former host translator for a cruise liner, once had to translate for our security officer as he expelled a French gay couple from the ship for beating a German woman up for reserving chairs at an empty lounge. It had a sign telling people not to reserve seats. The one thing they don't tell you when you get hired as a translator. People get mad at you, not the guy who's giving the actual orders. I've never heard so much cursing in French as I did that day. Just happened. Not sure how the guy ended up here but he had no phone, no family to call, wasn't welcome at the homeless shelter because he was caught drinking there, very cold outside. Mental health evaluated him and kicked him free saying they couldn't help, didn't have any vouchers or money to stay at a motel. He asked to go to jail. I warned him of trespassing at the police department for the next 24 hours. He refused to leave. Arrested for trespassing is the best worst option. Probably the cops who had to arrest Egg Boy in Australia for cracking an egg on the bald head of one of our senators on national television. It was after the senator announced that Muslims were to blame for the hate-fueled massacre in Christchurch's mosques. Never has there been a more deserving egging. What a true Aussie. Writing tomorrow's Dankify YouTube are we? Not a cop. When I was 14 my dad was driving me home from a marching band performance. Cops pull us over, my dad has an unpaid ticket of some kind and they need to take him in. I'm adorably confused in a too large band uniform holding a flute. My mom was 5 minutes away and I got probably 3 apologies in that time period as I waited to be picked up. My mother told me about a case she had. She didn't make the arrest but was the investigator. So basically the woman was stalked by her ex and constantly harassed. She tried to go to the police about it 17 times. With proof and everything and they didn't do it. So she and her friends kidnapped him, beat him up and threw him naked in a ditch. Edit. It also made a lot of news in the big papers in Germany. Here it is. That said, it is quite funny to find out about stuff that will go to the news 6 months before the first article comes to be. Is this a troll thread? Top comment is I'm not a cop but, and then every subsequent post starts off that way. WTF is this? I've told this story here before but I used to live with a cop. She was called to a shoplifting incident and found a young, totally emaciated looking boy, couldn't have been older than 12, who the shopkeeper had pinched stealing some bare essential loaf of bread or a can of beans or something. She and her partner did everything they could to talk him out of pressing charges on the kid but the shopkeeper insisted and unfortunately her partner that day happened to be a superior or something and whether or not to follow through with the arrest was out of her hands. She had to take this crying, scared, starving boy to juvenile prison with teenagers who had committed real crimes. She did everything she could to ensure he got immediate social services attention and lobbied to keep the charges from appearing on his record at all. But she still felt broken having to do that to a kid who needed help. Poor guy's wife died a year ago. Brain tumor. He's taking care of their 5-year-old son and he doesn't exactly speak the language of my country and one day we are called because someone parked like an idiot. Well, he had picked up his kid from kindergarten with a 4.13 blood alcohol percentage. Didn't technically arrest him but stripped him off his child and driver's license. I've heard a story from a police officer in Australia where medicinal marijuana was not legal yet, having to arrest somebody for supplying marijuana oil to kids with cancer and severe epilepsy. There was a news article stating they felt like total pieces of it because the guy they raided was a decent person trying to help a family friend with crippling illness and not actually selling the stuff to druggies. Even though it's legal now, it's so tremendously difficult to get. People still need to find other avenues to obtain it. I am a cop, but this one isn't my story. It's a buddy of mine. Woman calls 911 from hospital. Says she had been raped in our jurisdiction and was at the hospital awaiting her abuse kit. Officer responds and begins preliminary investigation. He'd been talking to this woman for a couple hours when dispatch raised him on the radio. The dispatcher decided it was a good idea to run a warrant check on the woman and discovered she was wanted through Kentucky, not the state we worked in, with full extradition. Meaning if she were found in any state in the county, the state of KY wanted her shipped back to face their charges. I don't recall what it actually was that she was wanted for, but it wasn't for anything I'd consider major enough to warrant full extradition. At that point the officer didn't really have a choice taking her into custody. It was done so obviously after being treated and released from the hospital, but nonetheless that was a ratty moment despite the magnitude of whatever she did in Kentucky. Obligatory not a cop. But my buddy got thrown in jail driving some drunk girls a mile home and some girl jumped in front of the car. He wasn't drunk, but 20 years old and had a beer and he hit someone. He literally did a mechanical engineering degree from a cell. The arresting officer argued for him, and the judge really didn't want to do it. But they can't set a precedent. The girl is fine. I think her wrist was broken, and some scrapes. Any stories from actual cops here? One time I was about 15 years old. I live in Canada and we were all at a bush party. So it was probably around 12 at night and I was just kinda like lying on the ground, not that drunk. So anyways the cops roll up and they're usually pretty chill in my area about these things cause they happen so often. Anyways the cop came over to me, asked me to walk in a straight line. I was fine and I knew I could walk fine. So I proceeded to walk in a straight line, completely tripped over a rock, smashed my face on the ground, and the cop then said, "I'm sorry buddy, but I'm gonna have to take you to the drunk tank." Anyways I got a ride with him, talked him out of taking me to the tank and he drove me home. My parents were pissed about my mouth bleeding all over the carpet and that's it. I'm not a cop, but I am Paul Blart. Not a cop, but the story fits. I was doing volunteer work with disadvantaged children in the community. It was basically an after-school program for kids who were from broken families and needed a supportive place to be. In talking with the supervisor, she explained how rough it is for some of the kids. On graduation day, most of the kids' parents will actually show up. The police know this and show up as well and use it as an opportunity to arrest any parents with outstanding warrants. So you're a 9-year-old whose parents are never in your life because they are deadbeats. It's supposed to be a happy day and mom and dad are actually there, but then they get hauled off in handcuffs. It just sucks all around. Not a cop, but I was arrested for revenge porn after my abusive ex-boyfriend made a false complaint. I had to wait 7 hours in a cell before I was told there was no evidence. Another 2 before they let me go. As I was being led out, the officer accompanying me said she recommended I file a complaint or sue them as there was no reason for them to have arrested me at all. Not a cop but a prosecutor. I was in law school working as a prosecutor for my summer job under the supervision of an assistant DA. I'm getting ready for my first trial of the summer. It's a fairly bad one. This guy was drunk and lit a random car on fire. The fire spread to the house because it was under a connected structure. An elderly man was inside and barely escaped and is messed up from smoke inhalation. So it's my first week in the office, but my second summer. So I'm comfortable just stepping in and doing the work. My job is going to be jury selection and nothing else to get me back in the groove. In walks the defendant through the jail door into the courtroom, shackled at the wrists and ankle. I instantly recognize him. It's a guy who I used to work with, had some classes with, who was constantly trying to convince my college girlfriend to date him instead of me. I told my boss I needed to recuse myself from the case, but I stuck around and watched him get convicted. Ended up talking my boss into a lighter sentence recommendation though by vouching for his character potential before he became an alcoholic. Ended up recommending and getting jail time plus rehab. I assume he's out by now. Obligatory not a cop but I'm a 911 dispatcher. Took a call from a woman who was yelling and screaming get away from me. Hear a male in the background and she is hardly answering us. Through GPS we get a location. Get a couple officers headed that way. Then she starts to talk to us. Long story short, her boyfriend was harassing her, stalking her. She didn't say he hit her or anything, but he was being really aggressive with her and she was just trying to get him to leave her alone. Guy ended up running away before officers got to her, and they never found him. But they did find out that she had a warrant for her arrest for failure to appear for some previous charges. So she gets arrested. Like, that's a reality day. Getting hassled by your D-head boyfriend. Then call for help. Then you get arrested and he's free. Was a MP on a Marine Corps base. Actual location withheld. And got a call about an alcohol related disturbance at the barracks. I figured it was the same old it about drunk Marines getting into a fight. Pulled into the parking lot to find an older woman. Pretty well dressed. Going berserk on a female Marine and a male Marine. Both Marines were still in uniform so I could tell the ranks. PFC female. 1 STSGT male. Everyone was drunk. Turns out this lady was the wife of the 1 STSGT and she caught wind of him cheating on her with the PFC. Confronted them at the barracks after they both admitted to the affair. The worst part of this was the 1 STSGT was an old SGT of mine from a different unit before our lat moved to 5811. The woman was escorted off base and we had to arrest the 2 Marines. Not the cop in the scenario, but he said those exact words. I had a seatbelt ticket from 2-3 years ago that I'd forgotten to pay and never received a summons for. So one day, my car gets broken into, there's glass in the seat. Laptop and backpack are gone. All that mess. The cop who shows up on the scene writes up a report, takes some fingerprints, and asks me if I used to live in one town over. I say, yeah, back when I was fresh out of college. Why? He says, their police department has a warrant for your arrest. I'm really sorry, you've obviously just had an awful day, but I have to cuff you. So, I spent a day and night in jail. My car sat there still unsecured, and they never found the burglar or my stuff. Felony marijuana arrest that I assisted on. The guy had stomach cancer so it was next to impossible for him to eat without using THC, otherwise he would be extremely sick. Unfortunately, possession of THC concentrates is an automatic felony in my state. We took the THC products but were able to bond him out rather than take him to jail. He was on vacation with his family at the time. Very understanding guy, and I felt horrible during and after. Years ago I pulled a car over for extreme lane travel. The vehicle was wandering into oncoming traffic and then it would go clear across the road and into the ditch. Then back again. When I got the rig stopped, I found the driver to be an active duty Marine on his first night back from a tour in Iraq. That was by far the hardest arrest of my career. I actually sat in my patrol car for over 10 minutes fighting with myself, but in the end I had to go with a promise that I'd made to myself that I would never let a DUI go. It cleaned up the results of drinking and driving too many times. But I will admit to you that this rough and tough cop had tears in his eyes as I took the man into custody. Actually not a cop. I make croissants at a bakery, and one time I made a batch of croissants with 1,200 layers instead of the customary 1,500. It was tough to get through that day, but here I am. Lesson learned. Failure brings about more success. Yang 2020. I'm not a cop. Just thought I'd put it out there. Former cop. Me and my partner respond to a DV call. A man called saying he was having an argument with his girlfriend and she hit him. Nothing too wild. We park and walk up to the house. Ann and woman are outside just chilling. Obviously not fighting anymore. Before I can say anything, this girl walks straight up to me and say, "Yeah, I hit him," but then she launches into telling me about how they've been dating for over a year and she'd just found out a few days ago that he was married with kids the whole time. He was there to pick up his things today and leave. He then said something really insensitive, so she slapped him. Just once and not hard enough to leave a mark. Unfortunately, the way laws and policies are written in my state, that's an automatic trip to jail for the night. I called my supervisor to see if there was a way out of it, but he told me no. So this already heartbroken girl who was trying to put herself through college had to go to jail because of that asshole. I tried to be as nice as I could about it, but I felt like such an asshole myself. That was one of many reasons I ended up leaving. Edit. Typos. I used to work the side of town that the mall and the Walmart were on. Walmart is basically mecca for shoplifting, and I'd spend a lot of my time on day shifts basically picking up loss prevention apprehensions. It was a fairly rare occurrence, surprisingly, that a shoplifter was ever a person in need, usually just people stealing it because they can. Got called one day to a woman in her 20s in LP custody. She'd stolen a pair of swim trunks and sunscreen. She had a little boy with her and said she didn't have any money and just wanted to get him those things so he could go to a classmate's swim party that he's been invited to. Broke my ducking heart for both her and her kid having to witness it. I offered to pay, but LP said they couldn't accept, and for liability reasons if they'd done an app they had to prosecute. Not sure if that's true or not, but damn, I felt ducking terrible.